There's something unique about the 1980s generation when it comes to love. For many, the idea of love was something that always seemed just beyond reach, as if it were an ideal rather than a reality. Growing up in a time of great change, this generation experienced a world that was filled with contradictions, romantic ideals that didn't quite match the reality they lived in. Love was something to be desired, yet it often felt difficult to sustain. In a way, the 1980s generation found themselves caught between a world that held on to old ideals of romance and a rapidly changing society that made it harder to reconcile those dreams with their real-world struggles. Love in the 1980s was complicated. On one hand, you had the societal pressure of traditional romance, perfect love, soulmates, happily ever after. On the other hand, there was this new wave of individualism sweeping through the culture, where personal freedom and self-discovery became the focus. The result was an emotional landscape where love was something to be yearned for, but also something that could sometimes feel like a prison. The 1980s generation, more than any before, was torn between wanting deep connection and holding on to their personal independence, often leading them to question whether love was truly attainable or just a fleeting dream. When it came to relationships, emotional autonomy was a major theme. This was the generation that learned the importance of standing on their own 2 feet, of finding personal fulfillment before seeking it in someone else. The culture emphasized self-reliance, and emotional independence became the ideal. But the more people strove for personal growth and self-discovery, the more they found themselves disconnected from others. There was this internal tug-of-war between wanting to find love and not wanting it to interfere with their personal journey. It created a tension that made love feel elusive, as if it was something that couldn't quite coexist with the desire for freedom and self-actualization. The struggle between wanting connection and craving personal growth led to a lot of emotional push and pull. It was hard for many to find that balance, and so relationships often came and went as people tried to figure out who they were and what they really wanted out of life. As this generation explored their identities, they were also exposed to an overwhelming amount of media that painted love in an idealized light. Movies, music, and TV shows promised that love was supposed to be magical, intense, and all-consuming. These portrayals set up impossible standards for what love should feel like. Who didn't want to experience the kind of romance you saw in movies like Pretty Woman or Say Anything? It was supposed to be exciting, filled with passion, and flawless. Yet when real-life relationships didn't match up to these grand expectations, the reality was often disappointing. The fantasy of love made people believe it should feel effortless, while in reality, love took hard work, compromise, and vulnerability. The emotional gap between the idealized versions of romance and the reality of relationships often left people feeling unsatisfied, like they were missing out on something better, something that was just out of reach. Then there were the divorce rates. For many in the 1980s generation, the idea of long-term commitment was forever colored by the uncertainty they saw growing up. Parents divorcing, families splitting apart, it was a part of their world. For some, it was a direct experience. For others, it was something they witnessed from the outside, but the emotional impact was the same. The fear of abandonment, the anxiety over love's impermanence, these things weren't easily shaken off. Children of the 80s, even if they didn't fully understand it at the time, were carrying the emotional weight of their parents' experiences with them. Watching a marriage fall apart could make the idea of long-term love feel like a fantasy rather than something attainable. It planted seeds of doubt in the minds of many, making it hard to trust that love could last forever. Despite witnessing emotional instability, the 1980s generation also developed a kind of emotional resilience. It was a double-edged sword, though. On the one hand, they were strong and independent, having learned to survive through emotional turmoil. On the other hand, that resilience came with a cost. The fear of getting hurt again made it difficult for people to open up fully in relationships. It was easier to guard their hearts, to keep things at a surface level rather than risk getting emotionally vulnerable. This emotional self-protection, though understandable, created barriers to deep connection. In many cases, people found themselves stuck in relationships that lacked real emotional intimacy because they were afraid of the vulnerability required to make them last. The media didn't just present an idealized version of love, it also taught a kind of emotional drama. Movies and shows from the 1980s made relationships feel like a constant roller coaster. Love wasn't just love, it was intense, life-changing, and often chaotic. But what happens when you take that kind of dramatic intensity into your own life? It creates pressure. Relationships began to feel underwhelming because real-life love didn't come with the same highs and lows you saw in the movies. People started to seek out that emotional excitement, sometimes at the expense of the deeper, quieter connection that comes with true intimacy. The desire for those intense emotional experiences often led to a kind of emotional exhaustion, where nothing seemed to live up to the expectations that had been set. Alongside all of this emotional upheaval, there was the financial strain of the 1980s. The economy wasn't stable, and many in the generation struggled with economic uncertainty. This financial instability took a heavy toll on relationships.
Stress over money can strain even the most solid relationships. And in the 1980s, financial concerns often meant that emotional needs had to take a back seat. People were focused on survival, not connection. And the emotional burnout that came with financial strain made it even harder to nurture meaningful relationships. Financial struggles created a kind of isolation, where people were dealing with emotional issues on their own, which made it difficult to maintain the closeness that's necessary for long-term love. Technology, too, played a pivotal role in transforming the way people connected with one another, but not always in the way they had hoped. The 1980s marked the dawn of personal computers, mobile phones, and pagers, innovations that were meant to bridge distances and make communication easier. These technological advances were seen as tools that would bring people closer together, offering more ways to connect, share, and stay in touch. Yet, as convenient as these new gadgets were, they had a paradoxical effect on relationships. People started relying more on text messages, emails, and quick phone calls to communicate, which, on the surface, seemed like a faster and more efficient way to connect. But what was lost in the process was the depth that comes with face-to-face interactions. While technology was supposed to unite people, it also inadvertently created emotional distance. Conversations that used to happen in person, filled with nuance and body language, became condensed into digital exchanges, brief, impersonal, and often void of the intimacy and emotional connection that real-time, in-person conversations offered.
The rapid shift towards texting and quick calls meant that people started communicating in ways that lacked vulnerability. The ease of sending a text or a message made it so that emotions were often left unsaid, feelings were conveyed with fewer words, and nuance got lost. In this fast-paced world of digital communication, the real emotional depth of a conversation, where people could look into each other's eyes and truly hear the unspoken feelings, was lost. Instead of deep, meaningful exchanges, relationships began to feel like they were existing in a vacuum. This wasn't just about physical distance, it was emotional distance that began to stretch between people, as the shortcuts of modern communication replaced authentic, heartfelt conversation. The emotional vulnerability that's required for deep human connection couldn't thrive in such a detached environment. Even as technology made it easier to connect, it created a paradox. The more connected people became in the digital world, the less they seemed to connect in the real, emotional sense. People may have been messaging each other all day long, but the exchanges were shallow, often about logistics, plans, or surface-level topics, and didn't leave room for the deeper emotional intimacy that people need to truly feel seen and heard in a relationship. This shift created a new type of isolation.
Despite the fact that people were always connected in some sense, many began to feel more alone than ever before, as the emotional bond between them started to erode. On top of that, the 1980s generation grew up in a world filled with uncertainty and emotional turbulence. Family structures were unstable for many, divorces were more common, and relationships in general seemed less permanent than in previous generations. The media of the time, whether it was the news, TV shows, or movies, often painted love as something idealized and eternal. But the reality many young people faced was different. Watching their parents struggle or separate left them with a deep-seated fear of love's impermanence. For many, this fear of loss turned into a protective instinct, one that made it hard to trust that love could be lasting or stable. As a result, emotional protection became a priority. Instead of learning to open up and share feelings, Many individuals from this generation learned to guard their hearts. Emotional vulnerability felt risky, like a dangerous gamble. This tendency to keep feelings hidden became a kind of armor that many wore, even in their relationships. And while this self-protection served to shield them from emotional pain, it also created a barrier to the kind of deep emotional intimacy required to sustain love. People were afraid to let anyone see their true selves, afraid that if they did, they'd be rejected or hurt. This emotional withholding, while understandable, ultimately kept relationships at a distance. Even when they wanted love, even when they craved connection, the fear of getting hurt or being emotionally vulnerable kept many from fully embracing it.
They wanted the closeness, the intimacy, but didn't know how to allow themselves to open up without fear. This emotional war between wanting love and fearing the vulnerability it required created a constant tension. It wasn't that people didn't want to love or be loved, but the emotional walls they had built up, whether consciously or unconsciously, made it impossible to form lasting, meaningful bonds. Relationships, therefore, were often disconnected, hesitant, and, in many cases, short-lived. For the 1980s generation, love was complex. It was a dance between longing for connection and fearing the vulnerability that came with it. It was about trying to find balance in a world that was changing rapidly, where emotional independence was prized, but connection was deeply desired. They were navigating a landscape filled with mixed messages about what love should be, what it should feel like, and how to make it last. The emotional landscape of the 1980s generation was one of contradictions, desiring connection but fearing vulnerability, longing for love but valuing independence, searching for stability but facing a world filled with instability. And in this emotional chaos, love often felt hard to sustain. Have you experienced the push-pull of love and independence? Share your experiences below. Let's talk about the complexities of love in today's world.